This is House Planning Hell, episode 159. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up today, it's a solo session where I go through some of my own project progress because there have been a few things going on in the background. Let's just rewind to begin with, because 2016 was definitely a year where it was going to reach a fork in the road one way or another, because we knew we wanted to expand the family. We knew the existing house, it's a 2-bedroom house, and I measured the floor area the other day and thought, I have a feeling it's about 80 or 90 square meters. Wrong, it's about 60 square meters. So it's incredible that we've lived as a family of 3 at the moment. Remembering I work from home a lot of the time too, so it's done us really well. But we knew at some point in 2016 it was going to reach a decision. Do we go for the self-build, or do we sell up here, buy another place and wait a few more years? And you don't know how long that will be when you get into that thinking, because it's quite an upheaval to sell the house and then to start all over again and then think to sell it again to go into a self-build. It probably would have been a little while. So throughout the year, you will have heard the various bits of land that we put bids on and investigated. And really, it wasn't a great year for finding a plot that I thought, this is definitely right. This feels right. And around about October, we went away on holiday. And just before we left, we saw something on one of the online websites and thought, well, that looks interesting. The trouble is, it's way too much money. And that was it. We got on the plane, went away. So a few weeks passed and it was still on the market. And that was strange for a couple of reasons. First of all, virtually everything that we see tends to go very, very quickly. Now, some of this might be the impact of Brexit, because people don't know what's happening in the market and maybe are slightly more cautious than they would have been at the beginning of 2016. There are other things. It was a bit more money than some of the other plots that we looked at, which is why effectively we were ruled out. But we thought, for whatever reason, it looks like it's a nice plot from the photos. It's an area we know we like. Let's go and check it out. And you have that moment where within seconds of arriving, when you walk around and think, this is pretty good. This has a lot of the things that we're looking for. It's a flat site. It looks like it should be away from flood risk areas. Quite big, actually, compared to a lot of the other sites. A view at one end and not too close to the road at the other. There is a main road that goes by, but because this plot is quite a wide plot and there's a specific place where the house would go, so you'd be set back from the road. So all of these things look positive. Definitely something that we were going to investigate some more, even if it was just to get knocked back. So we started our research, and this is where it can get quite tricky. I've told you about this before, that you're looking at a plot and you're not quite sure what's going on. You feel that there's something happening, but you can't tell. It's not as if you've hired the solicitor and they're investigating all the various different pieces in the background. You've got to suss all of this out before you put your bid in the first place. One of the tricky elements here was certainly the budget, that it was beyond our budget, and I think ever since we started, we played a dangerous game of just sliding down. It's something to do with what you want to pay versus what you can pay, and that's what sends you down this slope, is you see that what you'd like to pay doesn't get you what you want, and so you start to slide down this slope. And this was definitely the edge of where we could be, but it was the edge, so let's give it a go, shall we? And after we'd investigated it some more, because as I mentioned, we were concerned about a few things on this plot. No plot is ever perfect, but let's just go through a few of the pros and cons of the village. Obviously, I've mentioned we spoke to the neighbours, everything seemed good there, and that was, again, I'll come back to this in a moment, a really good place to find out information, to fill in some of the picture of what was going on this plot and the history. And we discovered about the person who owned this and why they were selling and so forth. Walking distance to a couple of pubs and a village shop. It's half an acre. Now, we discovered that actually most of it you wouldn't be able to build on because it's greenbelt, which is quite interesting, because there was a small section within the village boundary, and that actually means you can get a garden without being worried that someone's going to bid over the odds because they want to put 10 houses on this half-acre site or 5 houses or whatever it might be. Came with full planning permission for a very big house. We would never want to go this big. I think largely it's big because it had a basement. What else? So those are all the pros that I've told you about. Clearly, it was expensive. This is on the downside. Also on the south edge of the plot, and not on the plot, so not in our control, but there is a line of evergreen trees, which they're very high as well. So we can't guarantee that we can do anything with this. We've had a chat to the owner of the land, and hopefully we can lop off a couple of meters, but there's no guarantee. You know, it'd be nice to think that we could plant out differently another time, but it's out of our control. Also, it's possible that some developer homes might be built beside this plot. Again, this was what we found out in this journey of just doing our research. And the good thing is, knowing this up front, I think that would have been a real blow to the stomach if we discovered this once we bought and then, 20 new houses going in. But having thought about it and knowing that a lot of my money has come from property and that, I'm at peace with this now. Obviously, I don't want it. No one wants it, do they? Knowing about it helps a huge amount. And you never know, maybe I'll be at a stage where I can influence the project and get them to go passive house. We'll just have to see. And the other constraints where you have to build in this village boundary area is very close to another building. So you've got to be careful of things like overlooking. There'll be a ridge height that we have to stick to for a certain section of the building. Things like that. Again, it's all about knowing what you're going into. And as a first timer, I'm still worried. Is there a stone that I haven't unturned? Because there are a lot of, say, for example, the driveway that this, it's a self-builder basically who was selling the plot, who I think had got to the end of their journey, maybe spent a number of years trying to make this happen, and it hadn't. But they wanted a driveway going across a new piece of land, and the land, it was only title possessory, and you'd also have to move a telegraph pole and change the levels. And to me, it just sounded all very complex. It'd be much better to go in through the shared access and do it that way. So considering all of these, you then step back and just have an overall picture. How do we feel about this? And we felt quite excited because this is a stage of my life as well where not only am I able to do this, I mentioned it's right on the edge of what we can afford. However, we still have family around us, and much like Alex Baines, our self-builder who we've followed in the hub, who got into financial difficulty, I can see that his family have rallied around him and helped him through. And so that's very positive. You can't guarantee it forever, but it's here now. And another thing that was sort of on the edge, do we want to be building at this level? It's tricky because we'll be building a bigger house than perhaps we want to, maybe 200 square meters to 250 square meters, which is quite an advance from 60 square meters that we're at currently. So yeah, weighing all of these things up, definitely time to put in some bids, see where it all goes. And so we put in our first bid and it was just knocked back straight away. As I mentioned, that every piece of land that we've put bids in on before, it's gone over the asking price. And there's just no way we would have been able to buy this piece of land if it had done that or gone anywhere near the asking price. But this is where it started to get interesting, because he said, okay, if we accept this offer, will you put in a £20,000 non-refundable deposit? And that was just a very odd thing to say. He tried to sell the land once before and had got through the process up to a certain point, and then the buyer pulled out. So maybe it was driven by that he just didn't want to go through all of this again and have nothing to show for it. I don't know. I wasn't too sure. My gut reaction was, this is weird, but check it out with the solicitor that we'd hired, who said, yeah, this is odd because what you'll end up doing is just spending ages over talking about what the terms of this 20k non-refundable deposit are, and weeks and months will go by, whereupon you could have actually gone through the whole process anyway. So we put our foot down and said, we're just not interested at that stage. This is too dodgy. Then it went quiet for a little while, and I think we sat back and thought, here goes another one. We've lost out. And incidentally, the reason I didn't share this whole section of the journey probably was embarrassment. it is something that you get attached to when you start bidding on a piece of land. You get excited. And then when I'm sharing it with you, I don't know how you view what I'm doing. I wanted to have everything completed by my 40th birthday, which was last year, and I don't even have a piece of land. So that's pretty embarrassing. And I just thought, look, I've had an offer on the table here, which is, it's getting a look at here. So I'm going to hold this back. It could all still fall apart. So he came back with another offer of we could buy it for this price. That was over what we could afford. And really, we're at the stage where we had to put in our final offer. So we weren't sure which way this was going to go, but it got accepted. And there was a moment of excitement that this was all going through. Unfortunately, there were some terms attached. I think this guy was very, very keen to sell the land, which should have been in our favour. I'm not saying we're the best at knowing how this whole process works and where we stand, and perhaps thinking, well, hold on, if he is really keen to sell, maybe we can put in a lower bid. And this is the thing, by this point, we'd had the land valued as well, and it was actually lower than the amount we were putting in, but we were comfortable with that because we also felt that we had a fair idea of what he paid, and we felt that we were paying less than that just from work that we were doing behind the scenes. So the long and the short of it was we went into this, but being a 28-day turnaround as part of this agreement put a lot of pressure on us. Firstly, because we were only just able to get our hands on the money, and that would be another big tip for you. Have that money in cash. I know we've been told that before, but when you know that you've got the money, you think, well, that's fine, but there are different accounts, aren't there, where you get the money out straight away, or it's going to take a little bit longer. And then we had a real fiasco with some checks. Don't use checks. Use those chaps transfers or various things like that are instantaneous, because we had this situation that it was moving from one bank account to the other bank account, but then we couldn't touch that money for 10 days. It was literally as crazy as that. I was going from person, and this was the other thing, when you start calling everyone at the bank, everyone has a different opinion about it. Oh, no, you should just be able to do that. And you go to that person and they tell you something completely different. So expect sleepless nights if you're on a self-build. You know it's going to come somewhere. It probably won't be the same as me, but it will be something else. And I do remember a few days where I was just panicking. In fact, overall, I think fear has been something that I've really struggled with. It's largely not wanting to look a fool. You're talking about a lot of money. It's more money than I've ever done anything with in my life. And so putting it down here and then thinking what comes next, that we'd have to sell our house to be able to fund the build. Yeah, it's a lot of risk. And I think that does play on you a bit, particularly as a first timer. So the days went by and we hadn't actually received much from the seller. We were hounding the solicitors. Come on, look, we've only got 28 days to do this. And that too makes you nervous. What is it that we don't know? Obviously, we can pull out before exchanging contracts and then completion. So we went through, we did get all the information. There was so much information because this particular piece of land, there'd been multiple planning permissions put down on it. It was 3 separate deeds. I mentioned about this a little bit earlier, how a section at the front, a very, very tiny piece of land, was title possessory, which is not the full title deed that you want. Is your land, but that's not for a piece of land we intend to use. That was how he was trying to get this new driveway. And all sorts of things from going through these legal motions have made me realise that we need to do a podcast on this process of going through a solicitor and things that they check. Something else I thought was really weird is your solicitor will do all these searches, run them for you, and then just say, oh, I'm not an expert. Or this may be our solicitor. So you'll have to approach an expert if you want any more information on this. Also, what we found is we had a very competent solicitor who we spoke to, yet it was a junior who carried out the first part of the work. And then when the deadlines got tight, the senior person took over. And I don't think we really appreciated that might happen. So make sure when you hire your solicitor, you know who it is who's actually going to be doing the work, because it's important that you know that person. And we felt that this person didn't have that much experience, just in the way that they were throwing information at us that perhaps we could have gone through ourselves. When I've seen it before, I've seen Alex Baines' document, they put it all together in a folder, and it just looked much simpler as a client to go through and understand. So all of this to read through. Again, as I mentioned, there are quite a few little things that were going on this plot that we're trying to grasp and make sure we know what we're getting into. And then, yeah, it came to the day when we actually did it. We went through, we put down that deposit, so you can't back out unless you're prepared to lose that deposit. I think you might even be able to be taken to court if you fail at that point. And it was actually, that's it, yeah, it was after the deposit went down that we discovered this money issue with my bank, and that was scary to think that I could lose a big chunk of money just because I was moving money from one account to another and I hadn't thought through how we're doing that. Hey ho. So what I'm really telling you is I have a piece of land and I'm really excited about this. We're going to start this journey. I've more to tell you. I can't tell you everything in today's podcast. I have hired an architect and there'll be another episode on that soon. Just trying to think if there are any other lessons that I've learnt in coming through this. Maybe one of them, if you can do this, is to try and distance yourself from the land purchase, which I think is virtually impossible because you're so close to it. You want this to become your home, whereas someone else in that bidding process might have been able to say, well, take it or leave it, doesn't matter to me. If you're using that piece of land for development, you're not quite so bothered. But when you want it for a house, you just become attached to it. And I had another reason that I was feeling attached to this particular plot, and that is because it was in an area that I always knew this is the area that my ancestors come from. When I first moved up to Hertford, my dad said, oh yeah, we have some ancestors up there. And I looked around and two of the local villages, they were farmers in. So when this plot came up, I thought, hang on a second, we're close to the farm now. This must be on their land. And sure enough, when we asked the neighbours, they said yes. And this was the stable block here. That I don't know when it got sold off or separated from the main farm. But that was just a moment that I thought, this is really exciting because family and friends mean the world to me. Very, very important. And it actually goes one level deeper than this. That we were chatting to one of the neighbours at the edge of the plot one day when my parents were down and talking about the ancestors. And I'd completely forgotten this, but we actually have a self-builder in the family. So this is going back, I'm not even sure, 70, 100 years, who built a house. And from my plot, as I stand on the plot and look out across the fields, I can see the house that they've built. And that is very, very special to me. You go to a plot not even expecting a view a lot of the times. That's it. When you compare this plot to many of the others that we've seen, they all have issues. They're all a little bit of a headache. But this one in particular, it just seems like it's special to us. And I could see if we could do this right, if we can get through all the different hurdles, jump over them, then this will be really, really exciting. So I'm sure there's a lot more to come. You know what these things are like. I've taken you this far in the journey. But we're there. We've put down money. We've bought our plot. And the story will move on from here. Particularly exciting because obviously I have seen a lot of people in the hub moving on their projects. And this year we're going to have the first few hub members completing their projects, which is very exciting for me. They've been there for the journey of the podcast. Obviously the hub hasn't been around as long, but that's just really exciting. And then that my progress, hopefully we can build together this year. So if you are thinking of joining the hub, well, you need to get yourself on the waiting list for when we next open up enrollment. And I'll give you details about that in a second. Just before we move on, I've tried to summarize some of the points, the learning points really, of what we've discussed today in the show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/159. And if you fancy a mini video tour, a walk around of the plot to see what I'm up to, there's also a video on the show notes as well, and a few pictures. So 2017 starting off, quite exciting. And as I mentioned, I've more to tell you. Well, I'll tell you this bit, that We had the photographer come around our house the other day, take some pictures. So our house is on the market and we have an open day for our house at the end of this month. And ironically, I've talked about this before, how I hate sealed bids, but that's the way they want to run it. So I guess maybe it is a circle that now I'm looking from the other side saying, oh, sealed bids, how much money can I sell my house for? So it could be that we're moving into rented accommodation very, very soon, freeing up that money to be able to go through the process. And in the background at the moment, obviously chatting with our architect, trying to come up with some good plans, get that house that satisfies all of our needs and reaches Passive House standard. So very, very exciting. My call to action today, as I mentioned, is to get yourself on the waiting list for the hub, and that means that you'll be first to know when we open enrolment again. All of those things going on. We're still putting out the videos for Buckinghamshire Passive House, those case studies. We've talked about Long Barrow today, but Buckinghamshire Passive House in real time, they are starting the timber frame, but I think we are a little while behind. So they're just starting the basement work, which is using a system called Glatar. And we get a first look at that and how that all comes together. An incredible process. The team, actually, this whole project feels like it's really tight and moving forwards exactly on schedule. But certainly when you've got the German team involved, I remember every so often going down to the site and, it's absolutely on where they want to be or ahead of schedule. We've got the progress calls, which is where we get the community together. If anyone has any progress to report, we're thinking of doing a few different things this year. So it won't all be about our progress. We'll sometimes bring in some guests who can help answer questions or share experience, or even look at some plans if a hub member wants us to analyze what they're up to. Or I just think there's a lot of good stuff we can do in these progress calls. The modules, which we're trying to revamp for 2017, just to be a little bit more interactive and more goal orientated. It's the action that we're interested about. We don't want to just churn these out for the hell of it. It's got to be for a reason. And we have our private members forum on Facebook. So houseplanninghelp.com/join if all of that sounds good. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, we're talking about thatching with Master Thatcher Stephen Letch. So that's going to be a good one, particularly in new builds. Is it even relevant? We'll find out. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.